Hello, and thank you for joining us for what is the last Ask TCW podcast live. Hello, everybody, and as Jono's just told me, just so you're not worried or panicking, this isn't the last ever Ask TCW podcast, but unfortunately it is the last one of the season. Can I get an R?
Oh. Well,
just one of you.
Well,
okay, great.
That way.
Obviously, some people are more happy about this than I am.
You can tell that wasn't rehearsed, can't you?
No, exactly. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me, Aaron Lord, and I'm delighted to say, as you properly just guessed by that voice there, Jono Bullard is with us.
Good evening, everyone.
Also, Andy Haywood.
Good evening.
And finally, Antoine Marie-Jeanne.
Good evening.
Good evening, guys. So we've got lots of questions this week, and we will crack straight on with it. So the first one comes from a good friend, Geraldine Ellis, and she says, are you concerned the same instruction will go out for next season and the aim will be purely Europe? Ant, I'll come to you first.
Well, if the aim is purely Europe next season, with it being the Champions League, we're going to have to be spending tens of millions of pounds on the roster. So surely that's a team that will walk the Elite League. I'm all for it.
Okay. Andy?
I don't think we've got anything to be worried about, to be honest. I think realistically we'll know our limits. I think from what we heard in the Neil Black interview, the Q&A, at Saltbox, I think the general idea is that we won a game last year. It'd be nice to win 2 maybe this year, or at least, perform well in our home games. But, I don't think we're in any concern of sort of focusing solely on the Champions Hockey League next year.
Finally, Jono?
I don't think it's going to be too much of a worry. I think the CHL for us is going to be a bit of a pre-season warm-up. And I totally agree with what Andy said and from what Neil Black said in the Q&A. I think the aim has to be probably get a couple of wins, but that all depends who we pull out in the draw in May. I'm really looking forward to the Champions League, but that won't be the focus, because let's face it, there's teams in there that will absolutely destroy us. So use it for a warm up, use it as pre-season, but use it to get ready for a proper Elite League push, I would hope. Okie
dokie. Well, thank you very much for your question, Geraldine. We will move on to question number 2 of the night, and this one comes from Peter Cowan. And Peter says, should we have a Brit backup who has the ability to push an import keeper as other clubs do, rather than the free option? Lots of talk this week, obviously, after last Sunday's game regarding, sort of our backup in Dan Green, etc. But answering Peter's question first will be Jono.
I'll unmute myself then. Yeah, I think if the rumour is true that there's going to be a limit on roster sizes and there's going to be a reduction in the number of imports, then yes, I think we have to have a Brit backup. And I think it has to be somebody who is better than Dan Green, unfortunately. I mean, Dan served as well. I think I read something where he's the second most decorated player in Elite League history with what he's won with various teams, which is incredible when you think about it. But he's to even be in with a chance of doing well against the sort of forwards that the Elite League has got, you've got to be getting regular ice time, and he does not get regular ice time at all. So what is the point? You may as well bring someone in who you can trust. And I think Brit netminders are getting a bit more trust. You've only got to look at the likes of Gary Russell, who was at Braehead, and Murdy at Cardiff, who got quite a bit of ice time this year, both of them. So coaches are putting a little bit more faith in their Brit backups. Brad Day played very well in the game recently at the NIC for Sheffield. So I think we need to be getting a netminder of that ilk. I totally understand where people are coming from, where they say, well, we ought to have 2 import netminders, but if there's a roster limit and then an import drop, one, it's probably a waste of an import slot, and it takes up a roster spot. So I think, yes, Brit backup, but someone who has or is a bit better than Dan Green is currently. And that's no disrespect to Dan Green, he's been a great servant for us, but I think the stats speak for themselves. It's time to bring somebody else in. Okie
dokie, you can go and mute yourself again now, Jono, and do your stuff. And I'll come to you next. I mean, do you think, obviously Jono mentioned a few names there in Murdy, Russell and Brad Day, but do you think we are literally at the stage now where a Brit backup could push an import?
Beyond bounds, maybe Whistle. I don't know. I'd like to see the likes of Sam Gospel, who we've seen previously. He's did an all right job for us, and obviously played excellently for Sheffield against us. He's doing all right in Telford. Maybe give him a chance, but again, it's down to ice time, like Jono said. It's just like if they're not going to improve by sitting on the bench for 3 periods a game, and like Neil Black alluded to in the Q&A, it's not like we can. The games are so close now. It's not like we can stick a Brit backup on to get ice time in a game that we're already 8-9-0 up, because we just don't see them anymore. If we are limiting roster sizes, then maybe you could go for maybe chuck some money at like a Whistle and go for a number 1, and with the promise that Whistle will get a decent amount of game time. I don't know.
Okie dokie. Well, thank you very much for your question, Peter. We will move on to the third question. Don't worry, Andy, I'll come to you first on this one. But this one comes from Wide Boy JR. And they say, after watching the highlights of the second leg of your game, within the first 2 minutes of the highlights, there were so many pens and a punch/headshot. So my question is, why do refs let so much go in the playoffs? If it's a penalty in the regular season, why does it change in the playoffs? 4 officials allowed a headshot and more, in brackets, from the highlights. Does it make the game better, or does it take the edge off the game with more hooking and holding being allowed? And Y-Boy would just like to point out that they're not a Panthers fan or a Steelers fan. So, Andy, why do refs let more go in playoffs than in the regular season, or do you think they don't?
Well, they do, ultimately. And I think the reason is because of how sort of important, I suppose, is probably the way they perceive it, that these games are. And that'll be the reason why they do let things go an awful lot more. That doesn't mean that, any blatant headshot should go unpunished. Admittedly, I haven't watched the highlights, so I've not seen the incident in question. But obviously, they will always be slightly more lenient in the playoffs because of the onus on wanting to make sure that the players decide the outcome rather than a decision. And you could argue that should be the same case every game. But you've got to think that these are, straight knockouts now. So it is, it could very much rest on one decision, or a bad call or a missed call or something like that. So, I just think that's the reasons why the refs are a lot more lenient in the playoffs, rightly or wrongly. But that is why they are, basically.
I mean, Jono, I tweeted after the first leg of our semi-finals saying that despite, our schedule of the playoffs, playoff hockey in this country is something else. And the refs obviously play a part in that, in as Y-Boy says, and as Andy's just said there, saying, letting penalties go. But do you think that's a good thing? So, like Wide Boy says, does it make the game better or does it take the edge off the game? What do you think?
I think in some cases it makes it better in that the game flows a lot more. But I think you don't want situations like we found on Saturday in the third period, where seemingly everything was getting called against Panthers and Sheffield were getting called nothing. If you're going to let it flow, then you have to let it flow for both teams. However, I prefer flow in hockey. I don't like to see it breaking up with penalties every couple of minutes or whatever. But like Andy said, you can't have deliberate headshots or things like that being overlooked. And let's face it, there was a deliberate headshot overlooked on Sunday on Robert Dowd, as they showed the replay on the video screen, and that regular season would have probably been given a 5+ game, maybe even a match. Nothing called in the playoffs. I think that's probably taking it a little too far. But some of the little hooks and slashes and digs, I do think they do put their whistles away a bit for the playoffs, and I think that generally does lead to better games.
Finally, Ant, would you agree with both Andy and Jono on that point?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your question, Wide Boy JR. And if you've got a question for us, then feel free to get in touch with us. That's obviously if you are listening in live to us, then just send it via Twitter. Our handle is @CatsWhiskersTV, and you should know this by now if you are a regular listener. But the hashtag is AskTCW. But we will move on to Tony DeMarco's question. And Tony says, rumour that 2 teenagers from Swindon, Jordan Kelsall and Adam Finlinson, I believe, have been training with the Panthers recently, plus the GB under-18 squad, featuring Lion players Liam Redwood and 15-year-old Joe Hazeldine as a reserve. Will this mean that Panthers will be taking on apprentices next season as Sheffield has this year? Also, even though they might not be ready to play a regular role yet, would this potentially scare the current Brits into upping their game or risk losing their spot? And I know you spoke a lot on the previous question, but I'll still come to you first.
If it is true, then it's a fantastic bit of news, and I sincerely hope that we do look at expanding our Brit roster. Obviously, it depends on the potential rule changes that Jono's alluded to earlier, but we talked about it at length. We went off on a proper tangent on Monday and ended up having about a 20-minute conversation on Brits, and it's like, where is your next sort of David Clark coming from? And the only way they're going to get there is by participating in training, getting some game time, like we used to see at the Panthers back in the day. I mean, I hope so, and yes, it definitely would. I think give the current Brits a bit of a kick up the backside, which can only be a good thing. I mean, we all want to see the Lacko back from, say, 4 or 5 years ago. He was, one of the top Brits in the league at that point. That'd be nothing but an asset to the club.
Andy, coming to you next. I mean, do you think we should follow Sheffield's route that they did this year and look at these type of young players?
I think there's no harm, but I think you've got to look at if there's going to be any sort of potential gain for both parties. I'm all for them training and getting ice time if they can get the ice time. Then yeah, definitely, that's great. But if they're just going to be, part of a team by name, but training, so many times a week with I don't know, like the Lions or an EPL team or something like that, and playing games in the EPL, then I don't see the need to sort of put our name down to it just for the sake of putting our name down to it. There has to be some sort of plan in place, and there has to be some sort of reason as to why we're doing this sort of thing. Like I say, I'm all for it, but I don't want it to just become a sort of doing it for the sake of doing it because it sort of looks good or other teams are doing it. We have to be doing it for reasons of one, improving the Brits, which I know technically isn't, it's not part of the resume, as it were, but also improving the team, because ultimately that's what needs doing the most at the moment.
Jono, Corey's over the years he's very passionate about obviously the GB scheme and takes great pride in GB players within his roster. And over the years we've had youngsters train with us, and if you go back to the first season that we were in the CHL, we still had young players in there. For example, Conor Glossop was part of the roster that was took part in those games, or at least a few of those games. When you look at the Sheffield, which Tony refers to in Kirk and Shudra, I would say that they have been a success. Do you think that is something that we need to maybe, not copy, but look into?
Maybe look into, but on Kirk and Shudra, how much ice time have they actually had over this season? Not a lot for the Steelers. They've had plenty for the Steel Dogs, where they've been playing regularly, but when it comes to actual ice time for the Steelers, they've not had a lot at all. And there was the Challenge Cup game that was down here where they were both on the bench, I believe, and I don't think either got a shift. So on that point, you've got to think, well, what's the point?
But I could be totally wrong here, and it's just how I've taken, from their social media, etc. But they seem to be still part of that roster in the sense of that they train, with the Steelers. So surely that has to be a positive as well, though.
If you're training with better players, then yes, you are going to get better. But the whole point is you play a game and you play with those better players, just to see what level you're at, I suppose. Of the players that Tony's mentioned, I've seen Joe Hazeldine when he was playing for GB under-16s. Very, very good defenseman, but he was playing at a level and with his peers on other teams. Would that at the moment translate to the professional game? Probably not. However, he's certainly going to benefit from being around the Panthers locker room and also training with the Panthers. So we'll see. On the second question, actually, where could it potentially scare the current Brits? Yeah, absolutely. If you've got competition and somebody's knocking on the door for taking your spot, then yeah, you've got to book up your ideas. So that, in that respect, I think it could be a very good thing. But however, if there is a roster limit, as I alluded to earlier, then that advantage is sort of taken away, because you can't have them sitting on the bench because they're wasting a valuable roster spot. So yeah, I think with that question we need to see if this roster limit is true, and also B, look at maybe other clubs who've had apprentices and just see, is it valued? Do they improve from training with the senior team, but maybe not getting that much ice time?
Yeah, I think for me as well, you're investing long term, aren't you? You're not looking at this season, potentially, next season. You're looking at 3 seasons plus, I imagine, where you're looking to get the best out of that player, and then a good 5, 6, however many seasons of that player. So you're investing a lot of time in those players. That's how I see it. But thank you very much for your question, Tony. We'll move on to the next one, and this one comes from Duncan Hinchley. And Duncan says, do you think that next season we will employ a too many men on the ice coach, as we need to improve in this area? When I read this question, Duncan, I had a little chuckle like John has just had there, because I think it is an area that we do seem to get called on quite a few times. So out of the 3, just very quickly, do any of you see us employing a too many men on the ice coach? Ant, I'll start with you.
No, I'd just hope to see the 3 coaches that we've got actually working together next season.
John?
Yeah, it's obviously a coaching issue, because we do get called a hell of a lot for too many men on the ice, and it's something that needs sorting out, frankly, because it's a cheap penalty and a ridiculous penalty to give away, because it's something that can be so easily resolved. I mean, when I played Rec, I think we had one too many men penalty given against us, I think, in the whole time that I played, and that was in the first game when it was the first time we'd all really played together, and after that, no chance. And I know that our coach would have given us a right royal rollicking if we'd have got a too many men penalty. So it is something that does desperately need sorting out.
Just very quickly, was you the person that had to serve that penalty?
Yes, I was.
I thought so. Okay, Andy. I mean, I'm going to guess that you're going to say that we won't employ a too many men coach. Would I be right in that?
Yeah.
But okay, so I'll ask you, why do you think that we suffer so much in that area compared to other teams?
Well, I don't know if we do. It's a difficult one to get an accurate sort of bearing on, because we don't see the other teams half as much as we see ourselves. And so I think that plays into it. But I actually don't think it's a coaching issue. But I don't think there's a sight the coach can do about a player deciding to go on the ice before the bloke he's replacing comes off the ice. There are times when you'll see the sort of not necessarily penalty kill or anything like that, but you'll get that whole sort of one player will come off and two players will jump on. Now, yeah, there has to be some sort of level of communication, and ultimately that probably comes down to the coach, but the players know themselves, or at least the players should know themselves, who they're replacing, and what line that they're on. And obviously I think that whilst the initial part, yes, you could probably argue the initial bit is probably a coaching issue. I do think that a lot of the onus has to go on the players in this sort of situation, because they're the ones that are, they're watching the game as much as anybody else is. They need to be able to, realise that actually there's already five guys on the ice. I'll hang back. But like I say, I think it's difficult to say if we have the most. We certainly fall foul of it. That's for sure. I've got no issues with people saying that we don't, because we do. But because we don't see all the other teams half as much as we see ourselves, it is difficult to sort of get a bearing as to whether we're, average, whether we're high, whether we're low, whether, that type of thing. I'm sure someone will be able to tell us the stats, though, today, which will probably prove it one way or the other. But, I don't think we will hire somebody to stand there and count, because, let's be honest, the players should be able to do that themselves.
Okie dokie. Well, thank you very much for your question, Duncan. Moving on to the next question, and this comes from Chris GL Lovell, who I believe is listening in right now. So good evening to you, Chris. And Chris wants to know, do you think that the playoff seedings needs looking at? Given how badly Braehead have played, and he says no offence to them, I personally don't believe they were deserving of second seed. Am I being overly harsh, or is it something that needs to be addressed? Ants, I'll let you shoot at Chris's question first.
It's the way the conferences are. That's the whole point of the conference system, isn't it? It's to get the chance to get the higher seeds. You could change it so it's the top four from each conference goes into the playoffs, and then you 1v4 and do it that way, maybe. This to me is exactly the same argument of whether you should and shouldn't have the conference system in the first place. I mean, how many times have Brad won it now, and how many times have they actually been to the Final Four? Once, I think. So it probably is not deserving of them being the second seed, but them's the rules.
I mean, John, I'll come to you next. to be honest, the second seeding didn't really help Braehead, did it? Because they haven't progressed.
No.
So, I mean, what do you think regarding that? Do you think it's something that needs to be addressed, or do you think Chris is just being harsh?
I think it's difficult because of the way that the conference system is set up, and you've got to have some incentive of winning the conference. I mean, Cardiff won the Earhart and won the league, so they rightfully get the number 1 seed. But then there has to be some sort of incentive to winning the Gardner Conference, or what is the point of the conference system, really?
They get T-shirts.
True, but it's such a tough question. I don't think Chris is being harsh because the facts are there for all to see. Braehead have only made 1 playoff finals weekend, so they finished 5th was it in the league, and Dundee was 7th. So on that basis, no, they probably weren't deserving of second seed. But then with the conference system, what else are you going to do? So on that score, it probably is something that needs to be addressed and discussed within the Elite League boardroom. But as to what the solution is, unfortunately, I don't know.
I mean, Andy, obviously next season, 12 teams in the league. If the conference system does stay, won't that kind of, if it stays in, the winner of the second conference that doesn't win the league, etc., everybody knows the rules. Do you think that it'll be more deserving of them to get that second seed because there's more teams, etc., or is that a load of cobblers?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's cobblers, but I think you'll have a similar sort of situation. I don't think it's particularly harsh on Braehead. I think by their own standards, they've had quite a poor season realistically. And obviously the being knocked out by Dundee was obviously the sort of the icing on the cake, as it were, regarding how they've gone this year. I agree with Jono. There has to be some sort of incentive as to why, as to winning it. There has to be something that makes it worthwhile winning. And ultimately, I think that the fact that they get that second seed is probably the right thing in that regards. But it does sort of skew slightly the actual, not necessarily abilities, because I don't think that's the right word, because at the end of the day, it's a couple of games and it could very easily, there are games that we've seen this year where, it's been very close and no matter how low ranked they are, we've seen upsets before. I can think of a few, not many. I remember obviously the year that Fife almost caused an upset in the semi-final against Belfast. I think they lost, was it 1-0 in that game? Obviously there was the year that Sheffield didn't make it and they were knocked out by Hull. So there are upsets, and there always will be upsets. You could argue that, I appreciate it didn't happen, but you could argue that if we won this weekend, that would have been an upset because, Sheffield have been by far the better team out of the two of us. But obviously didn't happen anyway. But there will always be, the upsets, and there will always be, teams that get there that not necessarily shouldn't be there because ultimately they've won, so they should be. But on paper have been sort of a weaker side than the one that they've replaced. But I just think that there's no other way they could do it. Realistically, the only other thing they could do was if they made it like the NHL, so they had like a north and south divide, as it were, and so you were guaranteed that the final four was going to be 2 from each conference. But realistically, the league aren't going to do that because they'd be worried about the fact that you could end up with no Panthers, no Cardiff, and no Sheffield at the weekend, and they'd be concerned about ticket money. Because ultimately in this league, it's pretty much all that matters is the money making side of it at the moment. So, I just think that realistically, it's the only thing that can be done. And I don't have an issue with it, to be honest. Like I say, it's good for an upset.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your question, Chris. I think that the Cat's Whiskers don't think you're being overly harsh there. But thank you very much for getting in touch, and thank you very much for listening this evening. But we will move on to question 7 of the night. We're steamrolling through so far. And the next one comes from Lee Constable. And Lee says, after reading Nielsen's frustrated words in the Nottingham Post, will this summer be the busiest for a while regarding roster changes? And do you think any of the players are safe, including Brits, after the damning domestic campaign? So if you've not seen the Nottingham Post or been on Twitter today, then Matt Davies from the Nottingham Post, there are a couple of articles with Corey Nielsen, who just talks about the season just gone and how frustrating it was, etc. Do look them out. We've retweeted them on the Cat's Whiskers Twitter page. They are very, very good articles, and it's very good to hear from Corey Nielsen and his views on the season just gone by. But Ant, I'll come to you first. So will this be a busy summer for Corey Nielsen?
I hope so. It's not been great, has it? I'd like to think there's potential there to shake up our Brit pack as well. I think there's too many players that are just, they need a new challenge right now. And aside from the 3 imports that we've definitely re-signed, there's 1 or 2 that I wouldn't say no to. But yeah, I want a complete refreshment. And it does sound that way. It sounds like he wants a younger, hungrier squad. So we'll see what happens.
Somebody's been reading the articles, haven't they? Andy, I'll come to you next. Do you think it's going to be a busy one for Corey Nielsen?
Yeah, I think it will be. Even without that article, I think realistically it's pretty well documented throughout the season that he's not been happy with 1 or 2 of the players at the very least, and obviously the performance in the league and the way that obviously we've ended up in the standings isn't good enough, and obviously he'll know that as well as anybody else. I think there will be changes. I think there'll be quite drastic changes. I do think that there would have been changes had it not been for the injuries early doors. I think we would have seen changes a lot earlier on, and obviously there was a lot of rumblings going around that player X was on his last warn in, or player A and B were told that if one of them was being sacked in the morning, but we then ended up with injuries again. And realistically, can you justify getting rid of a player when you've not got enough players anyway at the best of times? So I do think next year we will see a different team. I certainly think that we'll see. We won't see anywhere near as many returnees. That was something I thought was quite prevalent in the article itself, was where he mentioned that he had got quite a few returnees from the season before, and there was a comment in there, I can't quite remember what it was, but it sort of read as that he wasn't overly impressed with some of them. So it will be interesting to see what happens in the off season, but I certainly think we'll be seeing some new players.
Finally, Jono, I mean, I said this last week about you and Paul, but you've seen a lot of seasons down the Nottingham Panthers. We're always going to get player movement after every season, because you're very lucky if you get that player that stops for 2, 3, 4 seasons in this league. It just doesn't happen. Yeah, you could probably count 5 to 10 players, maybe, like your Adam Keese, for example, as an import that stops in this league and stops with one team for multiple seasons. But it's something that doesn't regularly happen. But you've read the article, it was a very good article, like you've said on Twitter. But do you think it'll be busy? And also the second part of Lee's question, I mean, do you think any of the players are safe, including the Brits?
From reading that article, no, I don't think anyone's safe. And that's how it should be. They should be looking over their shoulders. They shouldn't have jobs for life. It shouldn't be an easy ride. If you don't perform, as if any of us didn't perform in the jobs that we did, we'd be fired. Or we'd certainly be on warnings. So, no, I don't think any of the players are safe. Apart from those who are on 2-year contracts. And to be honest, Jeff Brown, glad he's back because he's a good player. Spang, I actually quite rated. I know a lot of people didn't, but I thought he was quite a good defenseman. Probably played too many minutes, but I think with the right partner, he could be very good. McGrattan, well, what is there left to say about him? I think most Panthers fans would welcome him back. But apart from those three, then everybody should be looking over their shoulders. Nobody should have a safe job. And I think it's right that Corey's looking to completely decimate this team, because let's face it, the majority of the season, Continental Cup aside, has been bloody awful. So you want a load of changes. So yeah, absolutely.
So this moves us on very nicely to our next question. Thank you very much, Lee, for that question. But we'll move on to Ali St. Clair's question, because they've asked, how many new players do you realistically think we need in the off-season? And that's assuming all contracted players would stay if asked. So as you've mentioned, Jono, Jeff Brown, Dan Spang and McGrattan.
Can I just Robert Farmer, of course. How could I leave them out? I think, should Robert Farmer want to return, then yes, absolutely.
Well, I mean, Neil Black at the Q&A did say that he said that all Brits were on multiple year deals. So if they are, fantastic. But so to come straight back to you, Jono, when you answered the previous question, if you can just answer Ali's question in how many new players do you realistically think we need?
I would say, well, let's assume that there is a limited roster of 19 players, has been said, which would be 2 netminders, 17 skaters. So I think we need at least 10, probably 12.
But is that including Brits or?
Well, if you include the Brits, and if, like Neil Black says, they're all going to be staying, then 10. You need 10 new players.
Okie dokie. Ant, I'll come to you next. Higher or lower? Higher or lower than 10? We've got a 10.
I higher, please, because I'd like a couple of changes within the Brit pack as well. I've got nothing against the people that we've got, but I think a couple of them need a new challenge.
So I'm going to come to you on this one, Ant, because you've said it a couple of times tonight, and you said it on previous podcasts. And this is something that really interests me regarding Brits and how we view our Brits now. Our Brits have been with us a long, long time, and they've received criticism on many seasons. And people talk about it, and we need a freshen up. We need to refresh our Brit pack. But for me, it's not as easy as that, because Brits are settled in other teams, and realistically, who is better than our Brits that we can go and get, or who is better than the Brits that we have that would want to come to us? Because for me, in this, I'm not just throwing this out at you, Ant, but how sort of the Panthers Nation talk about our Brits is, well, it's easy. We'll just go and get this player. We'll just go and get that player. We'll send Stevie Lee Lacko off on their, horse and say thanks very much, but we're going to go and pick, Josh Batch or Robert Dowd, just saying two names. To me, it's not as simple as that. And I think as well, I don't know whether, it's just us because we see the players play. And like I said, they've been with us for very many years, is that we've started to take our Brits for granted. Because when all the criticism came of Stevie Lee earlier on in the season, Dave Sims talked about it and said that, 9 other teams out there would love to have Stevie Lee on their roster. Now, I'm not saying that Stevie Lee hasn't made mistakes and our Brits potentially haven't performed to their level, but do you see it as easy as just to refresh the Brit pack and go and get those better players from other teams?
No, it's not. It's not easy. But then you've got to look into the EPL as well. I mean, look, when we signed Sam Oakford, for instance, nobody knew that much about him, and what an asset he proved to be. We need to replace him, right? We didn't replace Matthew Myers when he left, so there's 2 slots straight away to replace. We've already talked about Dan Green. I think Green has had his time now. I'm sorry, he's a lovely bloke, and I'd like to see more of him doing the TV spots that the Panthers TV spots that he's been doing. I actually personally enjoyed them, but I think he's had his time now. And like we mentioned him by name on Monday, I think Lakovic needs a new challenge. I think he needs to go to a different team because he's become far too comfortable where he's at. Now that you've got a lot of spots to fill there, and good Brits don't grow on trees. But there are British players out there, and there are British players that will play for the club if they're given the chance. And until they're actually given the chance, how are you going to know if they're any good or not?
Okie dokie. Thank you very much for answering my little bit of a rant/question, however you want to describe it. But you think more than 10 players are needed? Yeah.
We've apart from the league winning season, domestically, over the long haul, we've been poor. And what's the point in? Was it something? There's a quote to do with insanity or something. Doing the same thing twice. I'm not good at phrases and stuff like that.
The definition of madness is doing the same. He's doing the same thing and expecting different results.
Thank you, Jono. That's perfect. And that's last season. This season we re-signed the vast majority of last season's team that finished 4th. Albeit, we had a fantastic end to the season, but to me that was down to the 2 players we signed towards the end in Quick and McDonald. We didn't get them back. We tried to replace them with 2 players that just haven't proven their worth. And now I'm going off on a completely different tangent now. And we have had the same brick pack for God knows whatever. We losing Myers was a massive gap. That's a massive player to fill. And obviously, you don't count for losing Oakford mid-season, but straight away, there's 2 spots there that definitely need to be filled in the close season.
I agree with you, and the slots need to be filled. I think when we had, obviously, Sean Phillips on from Red Army Roundup after Cardiff won the league, and we talked about Matthew Myers, you can't replace that player, but I agree we need to replace that slot. But finally, Andy, I'll come to you first. We've had a 10. Ant's going higher. Where do you sit on how many players we actually do need in the off-season? New players, that is, obviously.
I think the Brits all stay. I think the 3 that were imports that were mentioned on 2 years stay. I think realistically, the only other import you could make a case for would be Wheatman. Other than that, I think the rest are all upgradable.
Okie dokie.
However many that is.
Let's move on because I'm not Carl Vorderman. 9. Oh, okay. So you're in and around what JB says, but I think we all agree there's going to be a lot of player movement in the off season, and going back to Lee's question, Corey is going to have a busy summer. But it also sounds from those and reads from those articles that he wants it to be a busy summer, and he wants to get his teeth stuck into recruiting a new roster. So we shall see over the coming months. But thank you very much for your question, Ali. Moving on to the next question, and this one comes from Neil from The Cage. And Neil says, do you think the recent Panthers article around the new Shooters Bar deal hints at a TV deal for live games next season? specifically the line with all televised ice hockey games from the league set to be broadcast live in shooters. Very interesting article a few months ago, but JB, I personally read that and thought, well, they'll just be talking about away webcasts. But did you read it any differently?
No, I thought that would just be webcasts. Anyway, and given how well, there's no webcasts from Sheffield, we don't do webcasts. Brea don't do webcasts. They're not going to be showing that much, are they? And obviously, there's the two new clubs, Guildford and Milton Keynes, who, as far as I'm aware, don't do webcasts either. Maybe they will do now. When they move up, but we don't know. There won't be. There isn't. It doesn't hint a TV deal for me, because if there was a TV deal in the offing, it would have been all set up for this weekend, and it's not. And now we've got a webcast that's charging £10 a game. That only don't know. I'm not gonna rake over old ground again. But ridiculous. Sorry, but it is. So no, I don't think there is any hint at a TV deal. I hope one is in place somewhere for next season, but we'll see. But no, I think it's webcasts only.
I mean, Andy, did you take it any different, or was you along the same lines of it'll be webcasts?
I would imagine it'll be webcasts. I can't see it being anything other, to be brutally honest.
And I'll come to you, because you've been to pubs to watch webcasts before. A couple of the ones that have shown it. I mean, is it a good atmosphere? I mean, I'll be honest, I've never been to a pub to watch a webcast. If I get a webcast, then I'll watch it at home or go round some friend's house and watch it there. But I've never been into town to go into a pub to watch a webcast. But is it a good atmosphere? Is it something that bars like Shooters should look at? Obviously, I mean, you've experienced it.
The Continental Cup was really good in that the final round in Saltbox. It was busy. Everybody was watching the game. When the goals go in, it's a proper cheer. It's not quite the same as football. It's not quite that same buzz as football. But then the more important games are going to get busier. I mean, I've been to the Legend a couple of times when they legitimately showed some of the webcasts. I've been to Bunkers when they've shown some of the webcasts. It's always been a good atmosphere. And at the end of the day, you're with your mates, you're watching the game. It can be. It depends. Again, it depends on the game, and it depends how many people you get in there. If they only get 2 or 3, then there's no point. If you get a pub full, by God, you can have some fun.
Well, I suppose we will see next season whether they're talking about webcasts or whether a TV deal will be in the offering. So let's hope there is. But we will move on to the 10th question of the evening. And this one comes from Shorty from the Cage. And Shorty says, with a lot of animosity towards Sheffield after Sunday's events, and with our fans sitting directly behind the players' benches, do you think that this could be the first playoff weekend marred by fan behaviour? Now, JB, you was at the game on Sunday in Sheffield. I was there as well. I was a little bit lower than you, but we've had a bit of trouble in Sheffield before, but it does seem that it cranked up a bit there. I mean, do you think that this playoff, and especially because, like Shorty says, Panthers are directly behind the players' benches this coming weekend, and there's a lot of talk on social media, and I have to say it's very bantery about let's get stuck into the coaches and the players, etc. Let them know that Panthers are there, etc. Do you think it might just go over the line and trouble might be upon us?
No, not at all. There wasn't any trouble at the playoff weekend that was after the bench clearance. So back in 2001, so I can't see it. I think people are sensible enough at playoff weekend. Everybody mingles together at the pubs and has fun. I doubt very much there will be any trouble. There wasn't any trouble on Sunday, let's be honest. Apart from one muppet who muttered under his breath as he went past doing the podcast because he didn't have the balls to say anything to us. But apart from that, which is nothing, I didn't see any trouble, and I think there would have been more potential for that to get out of hand because of the high emotion on Sunday than it will do at the weekend. Now, I can't see there being any trouble whatsoever, as usual.
Well, Stewards did have to, like I say, I was sat on the very front row of Block 202, and Stewards did have to come down because there was a bit of a aggro between, a Steeler fan and some directed towards the Panthers, but that was low down. So it wasn't trouble, but it could have obviously kicked off into something maybe a little bit major, but, thankfully it didn't. But from my personal view, it does feel like, and I'm a football fan, but that kind of football mentality of swearing and the anger in people's sort of voice and what they're saying is creeping into ice hockey. That's how I feel personally. And are you with Jono in the sense of, we're going to keep as ice hockey should be and how it's always been, fans mingling? The banter that Panthers fans will give, the players and the coaches will be friendly banter. It won't be going too far, or does it worry you that there might be a little bit of trouble?
I'm going to sneak a load of bottles in and lob them at Tomo's head. No, I'm not. No, we're not. No, the playoffs. Yeah, it's about having fun and all the different teams and the fans mingling with each other. I do dispute the phrase football fan mentality. That really winds me up because it's not a football fan mentality. It's an idiot's mentality of people that are doing that. It's just that there's a vast majority of them watch a sport. No, it's not going to happen. I think there's potential for the fans to get on the players' back, but I don't think they'll cross the line. Well, surely they're not that stupid.
No, Andy, anything to add on that one, or do you agree with the guys?
I'm pretty certain that someone will say something that is over the top at some point, but I don't think it will be. I don't think it will be anything too problematic. I certainly just think the stewards will probably issue out a couple of warnings to a few people throughout the weekend, but we won't see any trouble, so to speak.
No, and that's how it should be. Moving on to the next question, but thank you, Shorty, for that one. This one comes from Craig Simpson. And Craig says, despite all the trials and tribulations the Panthers have caused you this season, how many of the panel will be back in August? So there's 4 of us on here. Andy, I'll start with you first. Have you ripped up your season ticket, or will you be back in August?
I'm back in August, mate.
You sound extremely happy about that. And I'll come to you next.
No, I've not renewed my season ticket yet, but I will be.
JB, I mean, you've talked about on previous podcasts how you might be thinking about it, but will you be back in August?
Yeah, I wrote an article for the website a few weeks ago about how it was all part of me. And
sorry, I only read Paul Barnes.
Fair enough. I would anyway. He writes much better than what I do. So yeah, it's part of me. Of course, I'll be back. As much as I may complain, as I've every right to, because I pay my money. I can't. Which gives me a right to complain if I feel that performances are not up to scratch. But this club has been part of me for many, many years, and it's part of who I am. So of course, I'll be back in August, which probably makes Gary Moran and Neil Black rub their hands together with glee, but there you go. It's in my blood, it's in my DNA, and unfortunately I can't give it up.
Well, it's a full house now, I'm afraid, Craig, because I will be back in August. By God, did it hurt, Sunday evening. Monday even was still hurt, and obviously looking back on the season, it's disappointing in it, and yes, it hurts, and it causes you, anger, disappointment, sadness, many, many emotions. But that's why we love sport, isn't it? And like Jono says, the club is part of your DNA, really, and players come and go, but the club is always there. And I think that's why all 4 of us have said that we will be back in August. But thank you very much for your question, Craig, and I hope you're doing well, mate. Finally, we come to the last question. This one comes from Graham Thompson at Clantastic on Twitter, and he says, at the end of the season, if Panthers and Clan don't get to playoff weekend, which has now come true, should there be an All Blacks team formed to play an elite select at playoff weekend?
Be better than third, fourth place playoff.
Oh, you've got in there before anybody else, Ant. I mean, do you go on then? You say it's better than the third, fourth playoff game?
Come on, anything is surely.
Do you think that's something that should happen? A mixture of Panthers and Brayhead, and they all wear special Neil Black T-shirts, and they're called, the All Blacks. I don't know. I'm taking this into another realm here, but I mean, do you think that's something that should be looked at?
No. To be fair,
I'm glad you said that. Yeah.
No, I don't want to associate with anything purple. Thank you very much.
Fair dues.
I'll take the mascot.
It'd just be another third, fourth playoff game. So no, it's a no from me.
I mean, let's be honest, Andy. No game really matters in that morning, does it?
No, but I still very much agree with what the league say, in the sense that until the day comes when people don't turn up and watch it, you're going to end up having it. Yep. And people will always moan about it, but people will always turn up. I'm guilty of it. Invariably, if I'm in town early in the morning, I will go and watch it.
Well, I was going to ask, there's four of us here. Three of us are going to playoffs. One can't be bothered. So out of the three of us that are going to playoffs, honestly, will you watch any of the third, fourth place game on the Sunday morning?
Yep.
So that's a yes from Andy.
I don't know. I've done it before where I've sort of walked in, sat down, watched the game for about 30 seconds, got up, walked out and went back to the pub. I think the most I've watched of the third, fourth game was when Westgarth was playing in Belfast, because he got more shifts that game than I think he did all season. Was it when they played Hull? Might have been when they played Hull. I think I watched 2 periods of that game. I used to watch the England-Scotland game from start to finish.
Yeah.
Unless I was proper hanging. I don't know. It literally will depend on how I'm feeling on Sunday morning.
I mean, I've watched parts of the games, to be honest, over the years. They've certainly made me laugh, not necessarily for a good reason, but with Ant says there about the England-Scotland game, and I agree with what Andy says. And until people stop going, then it's not really gonna change, is it? But we'll see how many turn up this coming weekend, I suppose. But that actually does bring us to the end of this week's podcast. We've actually rattled through in just under an hour. But so, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, that is the last AskTCW podcast of this season. Actually, the 22nd AskTCW podcast that we've done this season, and on average we do get over 10 questions per podcast, so it really does mean that properly we've answered 250 questions this season, and that comes from you, the listeners. So I have said it on previous podcasts, but really without you lot, we wouldn't do this podcast. And it means a lot that you interact with us, that you send in your questions. No question is a stupid question for us. We enjoy answering your questions, and hopefully we do it do it well. So thank you very much for sending them in. It is my understanding that the AskTCW podcast will be back next season, and potentially we might have a special one in the off season. We will certainly see how that goes.
Did you not send Aaron that memo about the termination and stuff?
Later.
It's been a great honour to present this podcast. Something that I've been very proud of. I've enjoyed it immensely. But mic drop, boom. No. Once again, thank you very much for everybody that's got in touch with us over this season. From me, if you are, going to playoff weekend, I hope you have a great time. I hope you have lots of fun with whoever you're there. If you've got a team, lucky to be there, you bloody yeah. Enjoy it. I hope your team does well. Fingers crossed behind my back on that one. But enjoy yourself, and obviously be safe. Let's have fun. Let's have banter. Give the players, give the coaches a bit of stick, but let's not go over the line, as one of the questions talked about. But finally, I will say thank you very much to the panel. I will say thank you very much to Paul Baum, Adam Reddish, and Tina Taylor, who are on this podcast. Thank you very much for being part of this podcast throughout the season and answering the questions. But for you lucky listeners, you've had the great pleasure of listening to Antoine Marie-Jeanne. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks all. Enjoy your playoff weekend.
You've also had, just the excitement of listening to Andy Haywood.
What's that mean?
There you go. There's the proof. It's just a little bit of jest. But thank you, Andy.
No worries at all.
And I look forward to our wave at the weekend. And finally...
Well, it'll be awkward because we'll be on the same side.
I know, yeah, we're going to have to sort that out. But we'll sort that out off air or via WhatsApp, okay?
Yeah, okay.
All right, thanks. And then finally, I will say thank you to the main man, who sadly isn't going to be with us at playoff weekend.
He's not dying.
Well, I hope not. I've got a very long flight to get it.
He's leaving us on a jet plane. I don't know where, but he will be back again. And that is Jono Bullard. Thank you, mate.
Yeah, thanks very much, and enjoy the weekend.
There we go. So, enjoy the weekend, folks. That's all from us. Thank you very much. Goodbye.